Hello and welcome to ABP Live. I have with me today Ms. Lisa Curtis. She has been the former US NSC Senior Director for South and Central Asian Affairs. Currently, she is Director for Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security, or the CNAS. Thank you for talking to us, Ms. Curtis. It's been wonderful getting your time.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So, Ms. Curtis, we'll straight away go to what's happening currently in the world. At one side, we saw the October 7 incidents when Hamas suddenly attacked Israel in the most violent manner. And then the retaliation, of course, has given rise to humongous humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And it seems that right now, no side is willing to speak to each other, and it's just going to go on. Similarly, on Russia, Ukraine, there's been no let up. How do you see this geopolitical mess sort of, creating a trouble for the global order in the coming times?
Well, it's certainly a challenging time, as you say, for the global order. Of course, the war in Ukraine has been going on 18 months. It has reached some sort of stalemate. And now we have a new crisis in the Middle East, precipitated by the horrendous October 7th terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israel. Certainly, Israel has a right to respond to these attacks, but I think the real question is how they respond. And as you say, there are protests happening all over the world, including in Washington, D.C., some of the biggest protests ever in D.C. just happening today. And, it shows that the world is watching and the world is concerned about the loss of civilian life in Gaza. So I think the United States is trying to play a helpful role in, showing support to Israel, but also trying to counsel some type of restraint and to allow for humanitarian pauses. The U.S. has not called for a ceasefire as of yet, but they are calling for these humanitarian pauses. And I have to think that behind closed doors, Secretary Blinken is, counseling the Israeli government to do more to protect civilian life in Gaza. But this is, a situation that is not going to go away overnight. This was a massive attack on Israel, a terrible attack. And, there are consequences. And, we'll be seeing those consequences, I believe, for a long time to come. And it will distract the U.S. administration. The U.S. administration must deal with this major crisis in the Middle East and support, longtime ally Israel. So this is going to be a very challenging time. And as you say, as President Biden is getting ready to head into election campaign mode, he's going to be dealing with these massive international challenges.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Curtis, if I can ask you, as you rightly said, that the U.S. has not called for a ceasefire, but a humanitarian pause, or maybe pauses. But U.S. is also a proponent of the two-state solution, right? Like India. Yet Israel is also a very close ally. How do you think U.S. can play that balance? And also, do you think this time probably the Arab world, especially Saudi Arabia, should have played a greater role, or maybe they will? They're just waiting to see how this sort of pans out?
Well, you're right. The United States strongly supports the two-state solution, and there will eventually have to be a negotiated solution here. I would say right now is really not the time for peace talks. That time will come, and I'm sure the U.S. will do what it can to facilitate these talks. And, yes, I think there are a lot of questions about, where are the Middle Eastern states in trying to facilitate this process. I think, there had been a lot of frustration with the Palestinians. There had been talks, there had been sort of deals offered, but it seemed that the Palestinians were pretty weak and, under the influence of, extremist terrorist groups like Hamas. So there has been a lot of frustrations with the Palestinians as well. This is going to take time to get to the stage where both sides are ready for peace talks, but ultimately there's no other choice. There's no other way to go. And the U.S. will have to play a role in this. I think, the Biden administration had not been trying to push peace talks before this major attack. The Biden administration was more focused on the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and trying to push economic deals, the corridor that was announced, the Middle East, India, Europe corridor that was announced, G20. So people were focused on other issues, and this attack, has come out of the blue. I think it surprised everyone, and it's going to, completely shake up the dynamics in the region. And I do believe that ultimately it will come back to needing a peace process between the Palestinians and Israel.
Mm-hmm. And also, do you see in terms of, let's say, the future for Abraham Accords, the future for I2U2, and also the future for the Middle East Economic Corridor, right? Do you think all those initiatives now need to halt unless this is sort of settled? I mean, I don't see them making any progress for that matter.
Yeah, well, I guess I would look at what I heard the Indian Foreign Minister say yesterday during his remarks at the Hindustan Times Leadership Summit. He mentioned that India still has a long-term strategy when it comes to the Middle East. Obviously, in the short term, everybody's focused on the crisis. And I think that was a very, wise way to look at the situation. That not that all of these new initiatives need to disappear, but they may be delayed. We have to put on hold the Abraham Accords and the Middle East, Europe, India corridor. Things like that will definitely be put on hold, but that doesn't mean that we can't get back to pushing those long-term objectives forward. But first, we need to get through this immediate crisis.
Ms. Curtis, you are an expert on Indo-Pacific. Now, Indo-Pacific, how India perceives, is about rules-based global order. But what we are seeing right now between both the wars is, be it Russia, Ukraine, be it Israel, Hamas, no rules are being followed. And that's something UN is also saying, that war has also rules. But since that this is all this is taking place, how do you think Indo-Pacific framework can establish itself when, in the future, when this wars probably will stop? That global rules-based global order, will that be difficult to put that in place, or that will undergo a paradigm shift, let's say, a new security order?
Well, certainly, I think, these conflicts will have an impact on what's happening around the world, including in the Indo-Pacific. And it is important that the laws of armed conflict are followed. And that, means protecting civilian life, which is, clearly not happening in the Middle East. And it, those, that has been violated in the Ukraine as well. And that's why, Putin is being tried for war crimes in the International Criminal Court. So this will have an impact. How these conflicts play out will have an impact on the Indo-Pacific. But I think, it's clear that the U.S., while it is distracted to a certain degree and does have to focus its diplomatic resources and, financial resources as well on the Middle East, it really can't take its eye off the ball in the Indo-Pacific. The stakes are simply too high. And, if China perceives that the U.S. Is, not focused anywhere but, the Middle East and Ukraine, they will take advantage of that. And that is something we cannot, we cannot wait for to happen. We have to continue to deter Chinese aggression. We have to continue to work with allies and partners, stand behind them, supporting Taiwan, supporting countries like the Philippines who are standing up to China in the South China Sea. It's really important that we continue all those initiatives because there is a chance that China would take advantage of the U.S. Being distracted by these other conflicts.
Well, that's interesting because then that brings me to the next question, which I hear a lot from American businesses and global businesses is, if tomorrow China attacks Taiwan, what is stopping them from starting another war? Because then it is going to really disrupt the supply chains, businesses, everything that is there. Do you also perceive that in your analysis that China may be now sort of encouraged, if I can use that word, to actually go and attack Taiwan?
I'm not sure I see it quite that way. What I'm saying is we can never let our guard down, and we need to continue pushing for deterrence, pushing our alliances and partnerships and nurturing those alliances and partnerships. But in terms of China's calculations, I think they recognize that any invasion of Taiwan would have tremendous consequences for their own economy. And I think this is something that they do weigh. So they would not be taking any such decision lightly at all. But again, I don't think that the U.S. should do anything to push them in a direction where they might even consider such action. But I think China still has a lot of considerations to make. They would not be taking any such decisions lightly. And President Xi has even said they would rather unify Taiwan peacefully, but it's something we have to be on guard for and ready. And we have to convince President Xi that it would just be too costly for him to try to unify Taiwan militarily. And it's important that those efforts continue. And we shouldn't be in panic mode about China. And of course, there's going to be a meeting between President Xi and President Biden in 2 weeks at the APEC Summit. And this is a good thing. It doesn't mean there's going to be a breakthrough. It doesn't mean even that there's a rapprochement.
You always need to talk.
Yeah, you need to keep those lines of communications open, and that will be important.
Mm-hmm. But then the US seems also very concerned these days on the China, Russia, Iran sort of tripartite, something that is coming up. Do you think that's a serious concern?
Yes, it is a concern because we have seen the Iranian support to Russia, the drones support. You see Russia reaching out to North Korea. That's also a concern. And China has also shown support to Iran. So I think this is something that bears watching, the sort of trilateral cooperation. And let's see what happens with the Middle East crisis, because there has been more support for the Palestinians from both Russia and China than Israel. They are not going as far as Iran in praising Hamas, but they certainly have not been supporting Israel at all in this Middle East conflict. So what that will mean for the future is quite interesting. And I think that that's something that definitely bears watching. Are they trying to use the situation in the Middle East to create more anger toward the United States and to sort of divide the world in a way that the United States and Israel on one side, and then Russia, China, Iran on the other? I don't think they'll succeed. I think that many countries recognize the horrific nature of the terrorist attack on Israel. But at the same time, I think countries are also hoping that Israel will do more to protect civilians in Gaza.
Ms. Curtis, now coming to India-China border standoff vis-a-vis India's increasingly close strategic relationship with US. Of course, there is this quad that is there, in which, again, you are an expert. This is the fourth winter, so to say, when Indian soldiers will be standing, eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese PLA. And this has been going on. This had been too little disengagement sort of a thing, but then it has, it's going on. How do you analyze this? Do you think the more the military standoff goes on, India will be aligning more towards US? And the fact that very soon India will see a situation where China will probably, China would have closed his border agreements with also Burma, with Bhutan, and India is the only country that will not have a settled border with China. How do you think India should now steer its way forward?
Well, I do think that China sees an advantage in not settling the border dispute. I think they see using an unresolved border with India as something that they can use to pressure India. So I don't see that China will, sit down for serious border negotiations anytime soon. I think that the 2020 border crisis certainly did, enable India to want to be closer with the Quad. We see India is much more receptive to the Quad and, meeting at the summit level, inviting Australia to participate in the Malabar exercise for the first time after the 2020 border crisis, getting closer with the United States. So definitely the 2020 border crisis has had a major impact on India's strategic orientation. And I think this probably will continue. The more that China refuses to go back to the status quo ante positions of May 2020. They have de-escalated at 3 of the 5 areas where there had been the buildup in 2020, but there are still 2 areas, Demchok and Depsang, where they are still forward deployed. So, I think they want to just sort of draw the issue out. They want to, force India to expend resources on that border. And sort of demonstrate that they can keep India on edge. I think they see that as a way to keep pressure on India, and I don't see that changing in the near future.
So you think that the standoff will continue for a long time to come?
You never know with the Chinese. They can always surprise you. And let's see how China's own economic problems impact their foreign policy, because they certainly are having challenges with the economy right now. So that's a big question. Will that impact President Xi's thinking on foreign policy issues? Will they, shift their foreign policy in any way? And there's different schools of thought on that. I can't really answer that. But, it's something to remain open to. But, they have an opportunity. If they really wanted to de-escalate tensions with India, the time to do it would have been before the G20. If they really wanted to smooth relations with India, but they chose not to do that. So it tells me they're probably digging in for the long haul, and they see advantages in keeping the border, unstable, unsettled. And this is something that I think India will have to learn to live with.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Curtis, coming to India-US relationship, right? As you said, this has, aligned India more towards US. But what do you see in terms of the defense partnership? We are very soon probably going to see GE coming here. manufacturing jet engines under complete transfer of technology. There are many other things in the pipeline. Then there is this ISET, which both NSAs are driving. So do you think in terms of India-US defense and security partnership, we are going to see some new paradigms in the coming years?
I think we already are seeing a new paradigm in the India-US relationship, which started really, I would say, almost a year ago, last January, when India and the United States launched the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, the ISET initiative, and agreeing to cooperate on emerging technologies like AI, quantum computing, semiconductors.
Right.
And that was taken forward during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington. And the fact that the U.S. has agreed to co-produce jet engine technology with India is a big deal. This really can't be overstated. China doesn't have this kind of technology. So this is important. Only, a handful of countries are able to produce jet engines. So the fact that the U.S. and India are now going to work together on this kind of endeavor really shows how seriously the U.S. takes the relationship, how much confidence the U.S. has in India and its future to be a leader in the Indo-Pacific. I think that we really have entered a new level, a new stage of partnership that shows a great deal of trust and confidence in the relationship. And, I think this will only move forward in the future.
Mm-hmm. And my last question to you, Ms. Curtis, I know you're having a very busy schedule. You've been in the thick of things when the peace deal with the Taliban happened between US and the Taliban. You were a part of it. Now, today, when we see Afghanistan after the takeover in August 2021, we are seeing that they are still striving for that recognition. The Republic there is no hope that probably they are going to come back. India, we've seen the Afghanistan embassy just shut down. We are dealing with Taliban in somewhat, in a different way to have at least the people-to-people exchanges going on, although we are yet to start the projects there. How do you see the Afghanistan dynamics shaping out? And is this a challenge now, also looking at what is happening between Pakistan and Afghanistan? Do you think that is another area of tensions that is brewing up that's going to come back to haunt us again?
Well, yeah, I was disappointed to see the Afghan embassy in New Delhi closed down. And of course, I was also disappointed that the Afghan embassy in Washington was closed down, because I think it's important for the United States, for India, for all countries to remain engaged with other Afghan voices, not just the Taliban. The Taliban did not come to power through an election. It forced its way into the country. Most Afghans don't support the Taliban. And so, there are other voices that do represent the Afghan people. And many of them are outside of Afghanistan now. And I think it's important to remain engaged with them, because what is happening to the women and girls in Afghanistan is unacceptable. And the international community cannot turn away from this. You have a whole generation of girls and women who are not going to receive education, are not being allowed to work, and are growing increasingly despondent. We're seeing higher levels of suicides. And, the fact is, the Taliban can't expect to hold down 50% of their population, not allow them to be even educated, and expect to succeed as a country. They just won't. And so this is something that I think the international community is not paying enough attention to. The UN is, people like Richard Bennett, the UN envoy for human rights in Afghanistan, yes, they are raising their voices. But unfortunately, governments, including my own government, the United States, is not doing enough to promote women and girls' rights in Afghanistan. And there is a direct connection to the future of terrorism in that country. Because, if the women are not educated, not having their rights, that's going to foster even more of an extremist mindset in the country. And we see madrasas that are opening up, educating a whole new generation of young men in this extremist ideology. Most of them will become terrorists. And, just because the Taliban may be fighting ISIS-K does not mean that they are good counterterrorism partners for the United States or India or anybody, because they're still allied with Al-Qaeda. Even though Al-Qaeda is lying low for the moment, they're still there. They could rebuild at any time. So I think we all have to remember that, yes, the Taliban is controlling Afghanistan, but they're also a regime that is very dangerous for the United States, for India, for all of us. And we need to condition our engagement. And certainly we should not be recognizing a regime that is not educating its girls and women, and that is still allied with terrorist groups. So I'm very disappointed, I think, in the way that Afghanistan is being dealt with, and the Taliban's really been dealt with very lightly, despite the persecution of women and girls and the continued links to terrorism.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think countries can really do now that even the resistance movement is also sort of not moving the way countries probably would have thought? I think for US and India, they really cannot now haul up the Taliban leaders. So what, according to you, can be the way forward?
Well, I would, certainly keep the terrorism sanctions that are in place, the UN terrorism sanctions, keep those in place. I would levy new sanctions on Taliban leaders on human rights.
Will that not isolate them further?
Yes, they should be isolated. I believe their treatment of women and girls makes them, they should be isolated. I don't think we should just, turn away, look the other direction. This is important. And I think that even though they are controlling the country, we need to levy consequences on their behavior. We can still provide humanitarian support to the people of Afghanistan. We can still engage at some level with the Taliban, but it should be conditional engagement. We should be laying out a roadmap. Okay, they want to travel. Okay, they have to do these certain things. They have to adhere to certain international norms. This is the only country in the world that denies education to women and girls. That should matter. They should be facing consequences for that behavior.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Ms. Curtis. Thank you for your time. That was Ms. Lisa Curtis talking to us about the Israel-Hamas war, Russia-Ukraine war, the Indo-Pacific, Afghanistan, the neighborhood, and what it all means for India. This is Nayanima Basu for ABP Live.